Hello everyone, and welcome to my BNB CBS Gossip 24 channel. In a moment that feels destined to be remembered as one of the most explosive turning points in recent memory, the script titled Steffy Destroys Sheila, Finn's furious slap leaves everyone stunned. Unfolds like a relentless emotional avalanche, packing betrayal, reckoning, rage, and long-suppressed truth into a single, suffocating confrontation where every character is forced to face the consequences of choices they thought they could outrun. Because this is not merely a scene about a slap or a shouted accusation but a culmination of years of manipulation, obsession, fear, and misplaced loyalty that finally collide when Steffy, no longer willing to play defense, executes her final devastating move against Sheila, stripping her of the power she has wielded through lies and psychological warfare, and in doing so ignites a chain reaction that pushes Finn past the breaking point. From the moment the tension crackles in the room, the air thick with unspoken history, it is clear that something irreversible is about to happen, because Sheila, so used to slithering out of accountability with feigned remorse and calculated vulnerability, underestimates Steffy's resolve and overestimates her own ability to control the narrative, unaware that Steffy has come armed not just with anger but with truth, evidence, and an unshakable clarity born from years of trauma inflicted on her family. As Steffy lays everything bare, every manipulation, every calculated move Sheila made to worm her way into Finn's life, every boundary crossed under the guise of being a misunderstood mother, the mask Sheila has worn so carefully begins to fracture, and the room becomes a tribunal where there is nowhere left to hide, because Steffy's words are precise, merciless, and devastating, not screamed in hysteria but delivered with the cold certainty of someone who has already survived the worst and refuses to be victimized again. Finn, caught in the crossfire, is visibly unraveling as the woman he once believed could change is exposed piece by piece, and the internal conflict tearing him apart becomes impossible to ignore, because on one side stands Steffy, the woman he loves, the mother of his child, the embodiment of safety and truth, and on the other stands Sheila, his biological mother, whose presence has always come wrapped in danger, chaos, and emotional manipulation. The script masterfully stretches this moment, allowing the audience to feel Finn's pulse quicken as realization dawns, as he recognizes that his hope, his patience, and his desire to believe in redemption have been weaponized against him and the people he loves most. And when Sheila inevitably attempts to deflect, twisting the story, blaming Steffy, playing the victim card one final time, it is the last mistake she will make, because Steffy's final move lands like a guillotine, a revelation or action so undeniable that even Finn can no longer rationalize away the truth, and in that instant something inside him snaps. The slap itself is not glorified, but it is seismic, a raw, instinctive eruption of fury and heartbreak that silences the room, because this is not an act of cruelty but the physical manifestation of years of suppressed anger, shame, and betrayal finally bursting free. And as Finn's hand connects with Sheila's face, time seems to freeze, every character stunned into stillness as the weight of what just happened settles heavily over them all. Sheila, for once, is rendered speechless, the shock on her face mirroring the shock in the room, because the one person she believed she could always control, always manipulate through blood ties and guilt, has finally rejected her in the most definitive way possible, and the power dynamic that once allowed her to terrorize everyone collapses instantly. The chaos that follows is emotional rather than physical, as voices rise, tears spill, and the aftermath begins to take shape, because one slap has changed everything, redefining relationships and closing doors that can never be reopened. And Steffy, though shaken, stands resolute, knowing that this moment, however ugly or painful, was necessary to protect her family and reclaim control over her life. The script does not allow for easy victories or clean endings, instead emphasizing the complexity of trauma and the cost of confronting it, as Finn is left grappling with the reality of what he's done and what it means, caught between relief and guilt, liberation and devastation, while Sheila finally faces the consequences she has evaded for so long, not just in the form of rejection but in the undeniable truth that her actions have destroyed any chance of redemption she once claimed to seek. The room remains frozen long after the slap, not because of violence but because everyone present understands that they have just witnessed the end of an era, the shattering of illusions, and the birth of a new, harsher reality where lines have been drawn and cannot be erased. And as the dust settles, the script leaves the audience with a lingering sense of unease and catharsis, reminding us that sometimes justice is messy, sometimes closure hurts, and sometimes the most powerful moments are born not from calm resolution but from the explosive release of truth that has been buried for far too long. World-shattering slap. The script pivots into a prolonged emotional reckoning that refuses to let any character escape unscathed, because once the initial shock fades, what remains is far more devastating than the act itself, the irreversible clarity that everything has changed, that the fragile illusion holding this fractured family together has finally collapsed under the weight of truth, and that no apology, justification, or rewritten narrative can undo what has now been seen, felt, and acknowledged by everyone in that room. The silence that follows is suffocating, not empty but heavy with realization, as each character processes the enormity of what just occurred, and Finn, his hand still trembling, is forced to confront the reality that the line he never believed he could cross has been crossed, not out of malice but out of emotional overload, because the betrayal he feels runs deeper than words can express, and the script smartly lingers on his internal collapse, showing that this slap is not a moment of triumph but a breaking point, the instant where denial dies and accountability begins. Sheila, staggering both physically and emotionally, scrambles to regain control, but for the first time her usual tactics fail her, because the room no longer belongs to her manipulation, and her attempts to cry, to accuse, to twist the narrative are met with hollow stares rather than sympathy, making it painfully clear that the currency she has relied on for years, fear, guilt, and confusion, has finally been devalued to nothing. Steffy, meanwhile, does not gloat or celebrate, because this was never about vengeance but survival, and the script emphasizes her quiet strength as she stands her ground, fully aware that what she set in motion has consequences not only for Sheila but for Finn as well, and yet she does not waver, because she understands that protecting her family sometimes means forcing the truth into the open no matter how explosive the result. As voices eventually rise and the chaos resumes, it becomes clear that the slap has acted as a catalyst, releasing years of pent-up emotion from everyone present, with accusations flying, alliances solidifying, and long-simmering resentments finally given voice, turning the confrontation into a reckoning that cannot be paused or postponed any longer. Finn's emotional unraveling takes center stage in this continuation, as the script delves deeply into his guilt, shame, and conflicting loyalties, portraying him not as a villain but as a man who desperately wanted to believe in redemption and paid a terrible price for that hope, because the weight of realizing that his patience enabled Sheila's continued intrusion into Steffy's life and endangered their child becomes unbearable, and the slap, while shocking, is framed as a manifestation of self-loathing as much as rage, a physical act born from the realization that he failed to protect the people who mattered most. The writing gives Finn space to reckon with the moral complexity of his actions, showing him oscillating between regret and relief, knowing that while violence is never justified, the emotional truth behind the act cannot be denied, and this internal conflict adds layers to the scene, preventing it from devolving into a simplistic good versus evil narrative, because Finn is forced to confront the reality that blood ties do not excuse harm, and that love without boundaries becomes destructive. Sheila, sensing her grip slipping, doubles down in desperation, revealing the depth of her delusion as she insists that everything she did was out of love, that she is the real victim, and that Steffy orchestrated the entire confrontation to turn Finn against her. But these claims ring hollow now, because the audience, like the characters, has witnessed the undeniable pattern of her behavior, and the script makes a point of showing how her refusal to take responsibility seals her fate more firmly than any slap ever could. As the emotional dust continues to swirl, the ripple effects of the confrontation begin to spread beyond the room itself, with characters questioning their past decisions and future paths, because this moment has exposed uncomfortable truths not just about Sheila but about everyone's willingness to tolerate danger for the sake of peace. And the continuation skillfully uses this fallout to explore themes of complicity and courage, asking whether silence in the face of manipulation is itself a form of harm. Steffy's role evolves from accuser to protector, as she becomes the emotional anchor for the family, grounding the chaos with her unwavering clarity and reminding everyone that the purpose of this confrontation was never to humiliate Sheila but to draw an unbreakable line that ensures safety moving forward. And her interactions with Finn are particularly poignant, because while she understands his pain, she also refuses to minimize the impact his indecision had on her sense of security. forcing him to face the consequences of his choices without completely abandoning him. This delicate balance between empathy and accountability is one of the script's greatest strengths, as it resists the urge to offer easy forgiveness and instead insists on honest, painful dialogue that acknowledges harm without erasing love. The narrative tension escalates further as the possibility of permanent separation looms, with Sheila facing not just emotional rejection but tangible consequences that threaten her access to Finn's life entirely, and the script underscores the gravity of this shift by portraying her increasing isolation. As former allies distance themselves and even those who once entertained the idea of her redemption now recognize the cost of giving her yet another chance, her downfall is not sensationalized, but rendered tragic in its inevitability, because the continuation makes it clear that Sheila's greatest enemy has always been her refusal to change, and the slap becomes symbolic of the final barrier she can no longer cross, a physical representation of the emotional boundary that has now been permanently enforced. Finn's anguish deepens as he grapples with the realization that cutting Sheila out is both necessary and devastating, forcing him to mourn the mother he wished he had rather than the one she actually is, and this grieving process adds emotional weight to his decision, transforming it from an act of rejection into an act of self-preservation. Meanwhile, the room itself becomes a character in the story, its frozen stillness giving way to movement as people slowly exit, conversations splinter off, and the immediate aftermath transitions into long-term consequences, with the script emphasizing that moments like these do not end cleanly but echo indefinitely, shaping relationships and identities long after the initial explosion has passed. Steffy's final exchange with Sheila is particularly powerful, not because it is loud or dramatic, but because it is final, delivered with calm certainty as she makes it clear that the cycle ends here, that fear will no longer dictate her family's choices, and that Sheila no longer holds any power over her life, and this quiet assertion of autonomy feels far more devastating than any shouted insult, because it robs Sheila of the chaos she thrives on and replaces it with indifference and resolve. The continuation also allows for reflection, as characters privately process what they witnessed, acknowledging that while the slap was shocking, it was the truth behind it that truly shattered the room, forcing everyone to reevaluate their definitions of loyalty, love, and forgiveness. As the script moves toward its closing moments, the emotional focus narrows to Finn and Steffy, whose relationship now stands at a crossroads shaped by both shared trauma and renewed honesty, and while the continuation does not offer a neatly tied resolution, it suggests the possibility of healing rooted in boundaries and accountability rather than denial, showing Finn beginning to articulate his understanding of what Steffy has endured and committing, perhaps for the first time, to placing his family's safety above his own unresolved longing for maternal connection. The weight of the slap continues to linger, not as an act of violence but as a turning point that forced everyone to confront what they were willing to tolerate, and the final moments of the continuation emphasize that while chaos erupted in a single instant, the true transformation unfolds slowly, through difficult conversations, painful separations, and the hard work of rebuilding trust. In the end, the script leaves the audience with a sobering but cathartic message, that accountability is not cruelty, that boundaries are not betrayal, and that sometimes the most loving act is the one that finally says enough, even when it breaks hearts in the process, ensuring that the legacy of that one furious slap is not shock alone, but the long overdue reckoning it finally made impossible to avoid. Aching stretch of time that follows the confrontation, the script settles into a deeper, more haunting exploration of aftermath, because the real devastation does not reside in the sound of the slap itself but in the silence that grows afterward, a silence filled with irreversible realizations, fractured identities, and the slow, painful work of accepting that some relationships cannot be salvaged no matter how desperately one wishes otherwise. Finn, left alone after the room empties, becomes the emotional epicenter of this continuation, as the weight of everything he has lost, and everything he has finally let go of, crashes down on him with suffocating force, forcing him to confront the truth that his greatest mistake was not trusting Sheila but believing that love alone could redeem someone who never took responsibility for the damage they caused, and the script does not rush this reckoning, allowing Finn's grief to unfold in waves as he oscillates between memories of the mother he yearned for and the undeniable reality of the woman Sheila truly is, realizing that the slap was not an act against her alone but a desperate attempt to sever himself from a cycle of manipulation that had been poisoning his life from the moment he let her back in. This internal battle is rendered with brutal honesty, portraying Finn as a man stripped of illusions, haunted by the knowledge that he enabled harm through hesitation and misplaced hope, and now must live with the consequences of finally choosing clarity over denial. Steffy's journey in this continuation is equally profound, though markedly different in tone, as the script shifts focus to her quiet resilience and the emotional toll of always being the one forced to sound the alarm, to draw boundaries, to be labeled harsh or unforgiving simply for refusing to normalize danger, and her private moments reveal the cost of that strength, as she grapples with exhaustion, fear, and the lingering trauma of having her safety repeatedly threatened by Sheila's presence. The writing underscores that Steffy's victory is not triumphant but bittersweet, because while she has finally reclaimed control over her life, she has done so by pushing her family through an emotional crucible that leaves scars even as it offers protection, and her conversations with Finn are marked by painful honesty rather than comfort, as she refuses to reassure him prematurely or absolve him of responsibility, instead insisting that healing can only begin once the full truth is acknowledged, including the harm caused by his indecision, and this insistence on accountability reinforces the script's central theme that love without boundaries is not love at all but a slow erosion of trust and safety. Meanwhile, Sheila's unraveling continues in parallel, though it is no longer framed as a battle for dominance but as a study in self-inflicted isolation, because stripped of her ability to manipulate Finn or provoke Steffy, she is left alone with her own justifications, repeating them like mantras in the absence of anyone willing to listen, and the script deliberately avoids portraying her as suddenly remorseful or redeemed, instead emphasizing the tragedy of her unwavering belief that she is entitled to forgiveness without change, that her pain excuses her behavior, and that her biological connection to Finn should outweigh the harm she has caused, and this refusal to evolve becomes her ultimate undoing, as doors close not with dramatic confrontations but with quiet finality, phone calls unanswered, invitations withdrawn, and legal boundaries reinforced, making it clear that the slap was merely the spark that ignited a separation long overdue. The audience is invited to feel the chilling emptiness of Sheila's world as she realizes, perhaps for the first time, that fear and chaos no longer grant her relevance, and that the control she once wielded has evaporated into irrelevance. The script also broadens its lens to examine the ripple effects of the confrontation on the wider family and social circle, showing how moments of extreme conflict force bystanders to reckon with their own complicity, as characters who once urged patience or reconciliation now grapple with guilt over minimizing Steffy's fears and enabling Sheila's access. And these secondary arcs add depth to the narrative by reinforcing that harm rarely occurs in isolation, but is often sustained by collective silence and the desire to avoid discomfort. Conversations unfold in hushed tones and private reflections, as characters admit that they saw warning signs they chose to ignore, that they prioritized peace over protection, and that the chaos could have been prevented had boundaries been enforced sooner, and this shared reckoning lends the continuation a sobering gravity, transforming the slap from a shocking incident into a catalyst for widespread self-examination and moral growth. As time passes, the script carefully traces the evolution of Finn and Steffy's relationship, which now exists in a fragile state of rebuilding rather than certainty, and their interactions are marked by restraint, vulnerability, and the understanding that trust cannot be demanded but must be earned anew, and Finn's efforts to prove his commitment are not grand gestures but sustained actions, as he establishes firm boundaries, seeks professional help to untangle his trauma, and openly acknowledges the ways his longing for maternal acceptance clouded his judgment, and this slow, deliberate growth stands in stark contrast to Sheila's stagnation, reinforcing the idea that redemption is not about intention but transformation. Steffy, for her part, allows space for possibility without surrendering her hard-won clarity, maintaining her boundaries even as she cautiously opens herself to the idea that their family can emerge stronger if honesty remains the foundation, and these moments of tentative reconnection are some of the script's most emotionally resonant, because they resist melodrama in favor of realism, acknowledging that healing is neither linear nor guaranteed. The emotional climax of this continuation does not come in another explosive confrontation but in a series of quiet decisions that collectively signal a permanent shift, as Finn formally and unequivocally cuts Sheila out of his life, not in anger but with resolute calm, articulating that love does not mean access and that accountability is the price of relationship. And this moment is devastating precisely because of its restraint, as Sheila's protests fall flat against the weight of finality. And the audience understands that this boundary, once set, will not be negotiated. Steffy's presence during this decision is understated but powerful, as she does not speak for Finn or celebrate his choice, instead standing beside him as a reminder that support does not require control. And this dynamic reinforces the script's nuanced portrayal of partnership built on mutual respect rather than emotional coercion. In its closing movements, the script reflects on the enduring impact of the slap as a symbol rather than an act, framing it as the moment when denial gave way to truth, when fear was confronted rather than accommodated, and when the cycle of manipulation was finally disrupted. And the character's final reflections emphasize that while the moment itself was violent and shocking, the true harm lay in everything that came before it, in the years of boundary violations, gaslighting, and misplaced forgiveness that allowed Sheila's influence to persist. The continuation leaves the audience with a sense of hard-earned clarity, acknowledging that some endings are painful but necessary, and that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of safety, accountability, and self-respect. And as the final scenes fade, there is no triumphant music or sweeping resolution, only the quiet understanding that life will go on, altered but honest, shaped by the knowledge that love must be chosen wisely and defended fiercely, and that sometimes the most important moment in a story is not when chaos explodes, but when everyone finally accepts that it never should have been tolerated in the first place.